Hi, this is your instructor, Vernon Creviston, and this is our first introductory video for one of our phoner chapters out of the Give Me Liberty textbook. Now, a quick note to make right before we get started with this is these introductory videos are just meant to kind of make you familiar with some of the major concepts, some of the major themes involved in each of these chapters. They're not in any way meant to be a substitute for the lecture PowerPoints from the textbook author. So please kind of think of it as kind of step one in kind of understanding these basic points, these basic ideas of each chapter. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Now, this first introductory video is on Reconstruction, that period after the Civil War where the United States has to rebuild itself. And I want you to kind of think about that term of Reconstruction. There are a lot of different choices we could use to term this period, but we kind of use that word because this is a process of rebuilding, of putting the nation back together, of reconstructing it. But that also entails, is it going to look exactly the way it did before, or is it going to be something new? Reconstruction can mean a lot of things, right? Use another word that kind of means something similar, restoration. Now, restoring something means putting it back the way it was before. Reconstruction means that it might be different than it was before. So those are some of the things to kind of think about as we go through this particular chapter of the textbook, this particular period of U.S. history. Now, there are some things to kind of keep in mind here. The way I would look at it is there are three real main themes to this period of Reconstruction in U.S. history. The first deals with who's going to be in charge of it. There's going to be a lot of different groups kind of vying for control of this process. They're going to work together, work against each other in certain ways. But it really kind of boils down to northern whites, many of whom want to see the South pay for starting the Civil War and conducting the Civil War. Southern whites who want to retain control of their portion of the United States, keep political power, social power in their hands. And then, of course, there's this large group of Americans, African Americans, 4 million of whom had been held in human chattel slavery, who are now freed by the end of the Civil War. And they're going to want to take their place in American society, become a part of American society. So all three of these different groups are going to have some different aims, some different needs, some different desires, and they're going to have to find some way to kind of work through all of this. They're also going to have to vie for control to see who actually runs this process of reconstructing the country. And that's going to kind of bring us to the next part. What's Reconstruction going to entail? What is it going to be? Is it simply restoring the old order, leaving white Southerners in control of the South, or is it about creating something new? Now, some northern whites may be on both sides of this issue. Same thing with some southern whites. Southern blacks, of course, are going to have their own agenda, and that's another thing to kind of think about. What are they going to need? Imagine that, 4 million people no longer slaves. What is to become of them? What are they? Are they full citizens? Are they not full citizens? Are they somewhere in between slave and free? Those are some big questions that have to be answered at the end of Reconstruction, or at the end of the Civil War, during this period of Reconstruction. And then the last thing to kind of keep in mind is, what is its legacy? All right? Was the South reconstructed? Did it fundamentally change? Was it different than it had been before the Civil War? Or was it simply the same? Right? They just chose different methods to get to the same ends, if you will. Now, you're going to find historians are going to be on different sides of all these different topics. So that's kind of what you want to do, is you kind of go through the chapter PowerPoint looking at this period of Reconstruction. Is the South different? Is it the same? Did Reconstruction succeed, or did it fail in restoring the Union? So kind of keep those things in mind as we go through this. Major cities like Columbia, South Carolina, the Confederacy, Richmond, Virginia, all lie in ruins, all have to be physically rebuilt. So there's a lot going on here besides just kind of these big political issues or social issues. There's also physical reconstruction that has to take place. So a lot of different aspects to this particular we look at it. And then, of course, we have to kind of understand who's going to be vying for control of this process, who wants to have their input. Republican congressmen, Republican politicians, people like Thaddeus Stevens are going to want to put their imprint on this process. They're going to want to drive and direct this process, this reconstruction of the nation. For people like Thaddeus Stevens, white Northerners who fought the war, felt the South was wrong and needed to be punished, this is going to be their chance to really reshape the South, make it different, make it look more like them, the North. For many of them, they're going to feel that if they don't, they could end up right back in the same place with the same problems they had before the war. Of course, not all white Northerners are going to be on this page. There are going to be a lot that are going to support the President of the United States, Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's vice president, a Southerner from Tennessee, who really simply wants to restore the nation. He really wants the country to kind of go back to the way it was before the Civil War. Now, Johnson and a lot of other white Northerners are going to support the idea of emancipation, of ending slavery in the United States, but that's about as far as they're willing to go. For them, ending slavery is fine, but allowing African Americans to be full and equal citizens is just going too far. That's something they can't accept. So they're going to be at odds with Republicans like Thaddeus Stevens, who want to go that full distance, really reincorporate all Americans back into American society at the end of the war. That's why they're going to be termed radical Republicans. These others, right, led by people like Andrew Johnson, Democratic Northerners, some Republican Northerners, they're going to want to go much slower, much more limited in their aims, their ideas of what needs to be done. So there's going to be a lot of vying for control amongst Northerners, amongst Southerners as well. Of course, you're going to have this large group of African Americans, as I mentioned earlier, that need help, that want certain things themselves. People like Fountain Hughes, born in the 1840s, lived under slavery the first 15, 16 years of his life. Now at the end of the war, he finds himself free. Free to do what, though? Well, what is he? He's no longer a slave, but is he a citizen? What can he do? He doesn't have a lot of job skills. He doesn't have an education. So what's to become of him? He owns nothing. Everything he had was given to him by his former owner. Now that's all taken away from him. What takes its place? So there's some big questions that have to be answered here. Of course, white Southerners are going to fight back against a lot of this. But even then, because black Southerners and white Northerners, especially radical Republicans like Thaddeus Stevens, are going to find some common ground. They're going to both see each other as allies. They're going to work together to overcome the resistance of people like Andrew Johnson and make some changes. They're going to institute a lot of reforms, a lot of congressional legislation to create things like these freedmen schools that you see on the screen, schools where people like Fountain Hughes can go and get some kind of help, some kind of aid, an education, learn some job skills, legal representation. All those things could be provided through these schools. So there are some changes coming to the South. Of course, the big changes are going to come in the areas of political rights. A lot of African Americans are going to push to become members of American society. They're going to find support from radical Republicans who see them as political allies, as people that will help them retain control of the federal government, and they'll work together to push through a series of laws, things like the 1866 Civil Rights Act, things like the 14th and 15th Amendments, important amendments to our Constitution that we still use today. Not necessarily in the same ways we had after the Civil War, but definitely to understand who is a citizen of the United States and what their rights are. Well, back in the 1860s, African Americans used those amendments to protect their rights, to give them a voice in their society. So big changes were coming to the South. Of course, there was a lot of resistance. White Southerners didn't want to see these changes. They used terror organizations like the Ku Klux Klan or other things called White Leagues, former Confederate soldiers that would band together to try and stop these changes, destroy freedmen's schools, keep black Southerners from being able to vote, using terror or intimidation to make sure they would stay away from polling places, to slowly but surely reassert control over their society in the South, to make it still a white Southern political entity. So there's a lot going on during this period of Reconstruction. Really what a lot of people came to see was Reconstruction really failed to live up to its promise. As a African-American intellectual of the late 19th, early 20th centuries, W.E.B. Du Bois said that there was this opportunity here that was almost fulfilled, seemed to be working, but then because of white Southern resistance and a lack of dedication on the part of white Northerners, the process seemed to fall apart. White Southerners regained control of the South and in the end ended up restoring the country, making it look much like it had before the Civil War. But you have to decide, is that correct? Are people like W.E.B. Du Bois correct? Did Reconstruction completely fail? Or did it just take way too long? Maybe Reconstruction really goes all the way through to the 1960s. We'll kind of look at this, right? Kind of get an idea of what's going on here during this process. But kind of keep these big ideas in mind as you go through and look at the PowerPoint lecture from the textbook and then look at some of the exercises for this chapter as well. So thank you, and I'll see you in the next chapter.